Have you ever been partway through your watercolor painting when the paint dried too soon and you couldn't lift it with a brush? Well, that's what happened to me with this painting. At first I thought, oh, I'm going to have to redo it. And then I remembered what a great watercolor teacher told me years ago: use a Mr. Clean magic eraser. In this video, I'm going to show you how I developed this watercolor scene from composition to using backwashes to create crashing waves, and yes, how Mr. Clean Magic Eraser saved my painting. This is the reference photo, one that I took while vacationing on Sullivan's Island. I like this photo because it was a really intense blue morning, and the color of the woman's shirt really contrasts nicely with that deep blue. At first I wanted to move her over to the left a little bit so that she's about a third of the way over and paint the dogs. But after I moved her, I realized that the dogs could be a bit of a distraction and make the composition too complex and cluttered, so I took them out. The way I ended up painting her was as if she's looking at some distant object, such as a lighthouse. I decided to start this painting with the water instead of the sky. This is a combination of Cobalt blue and Indanthrone blue, and I mixed them up a little bit in my palette, and then also I'm mixing them directly on the paper. To make a crashing wave using the backwash technique, you want to have wet paint above and below where the wave is going to be. And that's what I've done here. Now I'm adding clean water onto the paper in between the two areas of wet paint. And if you watch closely, you can see how the water is moving up into the darker blue and down into the lighter blue, making a sense of spray. I add additional droplets of water to try to shape the wave and make it look a little bit random. Because the sunlight is coming from the left, the shadows on the waves are going to be a little bit on the right and the front. I'm depicting those shadows with a combination of cobalt blue and undersea green. This is wet into wet. This backwash technique that I use is so wet that it keeps the paper wet for a long time and you can touch it up. It gives you a longer working time. It's about now that I realized that my blue paint over the top of the crashing wave had dried and I couldn't lift it with a brush. Getting a backwash relies on differences of moisture. If the paper is wet with pigment, but it's less wet than the pigment you're putting down, or if you're putting down water, the water or pigment that's wetter will run into the slightly drier part of the painting. And so if you don't know that, when you're trying to do, say, a flat wash and that happens to you, you'll be upset because you want it to be flat. But in this case, I wanted it to happen, but it didn't because the paint had dried. Here I'm dropping in a little bit of Winsor violet just to get this sense of a shadow. There's a hard edge here that I don't like, and I'm trying to lift it with this brush. This brush is barely making any difference at all. So that's when I decided, again, I need to use the magic eraser. I've torn off a little piece of the magic eraser, dipped it in clean water, and wrung it out pretty well so it's damp. Then I've gently guided it along the edge that I think is too harsh. Now in some of these cases my hand's in the way, you can't see. Later on you'll be able to see that. When I have a large area that I need to scrub out, I'll use a lot of pressure. That's where you need good paper like this. Now that I've lifted that hard edge, I'm moving on to the next section of the crashing wave, where again I've got wet paint on the top and on the bottom so that I can cause a backwash. Here's where the paint dried, so I can't get a proper backwash. Not only did the magic eraser remove the dried paint I didn't want, it wet the remaining paint so I can make the backwash I want. Here's another dried edge I need to deal with. And another. I'm going to paint the sky as a blue gradient without any clouds, but notice how the paint is going on dry. This means I didn't have enough pigment in my brush. I probably could have used a larger brush. Another thing I want to point out about doing gradient washes is that if you don't do them very often, they can be a bit tricky. And I've seen professional artists struggle with these, and so if you have to go back over it, as long as it's wet, you'll be fine. You can go over it several times and probably get it to work out, which is what I did here. For the woman's skin and hair, I'm using diluted burnt sienna and then going back with a darker burnt sienna to start to build shadows. In Charleston Harbor, there's a red and white striped lighthouse on Morris Island. I'm going to spatter some white paint to get the sense of more spray. Before I did that, I spritzed the paper so it was white in places, so as the white spatter comes onto the paper, it will diffuse a little bit. Here's the finished painting. For more information on how to do gradient washes, check out this video.